Hello, everyone. Welcome to the At Emmaus podcast, a space that we create for Christians who are working in the corporate world to connect their faith and their work. We know that this is always a disconnect that exists for many people, where we live in a world where we have to kind of function in a secular setting, but we have strong faith. And so we're creating a space here where we bring in guests, jog our thinking, and we can prioritize our actions to be practical so that we can be better witnesses for him. So with that being said, I'm very excited today to have Prabhakar Richardson join me on this podcast. He's a senior commercial and customer engagement leader with over 2 decades of experience driving growth across pharmaceutical companies and others. He's transformed many biopharmaceutical companies, driven innovation through that. He's led at an executive level for global organizations. He shaped omnichannel strategy, which I'm sure is top of mind for many of you guys who are listening. He's done several brand launches as well as enterprise operations. Alongside his corporate career, Prabhakar is also the founder of Fourth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, where he writes and he speaks on leadership and provides his perspective on that. So Prabhakar, welcome. Thrilled to have you, and thank you so much for joining us here.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I really appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here.
Perfect. So Prabhakar, I know you and I kind of know each other in passing through our own careers, but would love to kind of just get an overview of your career journey and kind of like what brought you to where you are right now.
Yeah. No, happy to. And yeah, I think we go back to our GSK days,
That's
about
right.
mid-career for me to this point. I grew up in Arkansas, went to the University of Memphis for college, and fortunate enough to marry right out of college. And she's probably the underpinning to this entire story and enabling all of what I'm about to say to happen. But I've been, I guess, kind of all over. I started in banking. I started with a local Mississippi bank, even though I had an international business degree, kind of opposite ends of that spectrum, but did that for 5 years before I got into the pharma world, where I joined as a sales rep and didn't know too much about what I was really getting into, except that I was always looking for the opportunity to continue to grow, even after taking on those new challenges. And so I was really fortunate that while I was a sales rep, I was able to get my MBA and join a program that our employer was offering at the time that allowed me to take on 2 roles domestically and 2 roles internationally over a period of about 4.5 years. And so in that time was able to meet great folks like yourself, but also live in some really exciting places. We moved to North Carolina, then to Paris before going a long way back to Seattle, and then moved back to London. And at that time, that program I was on kind of ended. And so we were enjoying this life outside of the U.S. and we're fortunate enough to find our next role located in Belgium. And so we stayed there for a few years. There's a lot of faith that we're going to talk about that comes through all of those moves and the trials that come along with living internationally before we moved back to the U.S. in 2018, just before the pandemic. In the pandemic, I ended up switching companies and went and launched a vaccine that was near to many, I'm sure in some ways, without naming what that was. And after that, ended up at the company that I was most recently with, where I was brought in through a global transformation that they were going through, and had an opportunity to build a great team there and really do some great omnichannel work in that setting. But all along the way, I know we're going to get into it. All along the way, we're going to talk about how kind of faith weaves in and out of there, and honestly ebbed and flowed as we went through that journey with a lot of various things going on. Just personally, we've got 4 kids. We 2 of them are in college. We've got another one headed that way this fall. So that's been a whole different season of life too. But those 4 kids arrived to us, 1 through adoption and 3 biological after that. So we've got a bit of testimony and faith that lies there too. So that's our background. 2 dogs. Hopefully in the background they don't make themselves known today, but that's where we're at. So.
Very good. That sounds exciting. A lot of transition across the globe. So yeah, really actually looking forward to kind of talking to you a little bit about how those decisions were made, and I'm sure they'll come up throughout our conversation. But before we get into that, Parker would love to talk to you about like omnichannel really quickly, just to get your
Okay.
perspective. So, I know it's many organizations are going through this. So kind of give us overview when you think of omnichannel. What is I think we all know what it is, but like maybe what's the biggest challenges you're seeing organizations face as they're trying to implement this?
Well, if I can be a little bit provocative in my initial response, and I'll maybe back off of that, I feel like the biggest challenge that organizations are facing, just to regurgitate your question there, is actually the word itself. And so
Mm,
I've been quite open in my own journey with that word, that I think we're arriving at a point in time in which we probably need to think about eliminating the word, because the word almost creates a something separate or something in addition or something extra. And a lot of times, I think certainly what we've learned is where we were successful in integrating that idea of omnichannel was when it was integrated as just, in essence, marketing. Like it is how we, or customer engagement, pick whatever term or flavor you prefer. It becomes just how we engage as we go to engage with customers. We do so in a way that spans all of our available channels, including the sales team and the people. Um, that has to be driven and orchestrated by data, that needs engines or something similar to scale at the both the personalization level we're pursuing, but also at the scale of customers that we have, the data that we have, the content that we have. So it's quickly gone from something that is, I think, something we thought we could do as an industry with just more people and more of an army, to something now that requires the technology that's emerging.
hmm
And when we can, I think it's important in the journey to keep it separate, to keep that omnichannel title or some flavor of that as something separate. But eventually it has to just become the way we engage, and we do that in an omnichannel way. So I think that's one of the biggest problems, is just trying to figure out how it becomes part of what we do. One just real quick great story we had was when we were going through some of our own business cases and pilots and learning journey ourselves. We got to this point where a couple of people in the local affiliate pushed back on what we were trying to do. And they said, I don't have time to do my day job and do this. And kind of a light bulb really went off in that moment. It was like, well, that's exactly the point. This is your new day job. Like you don't need to do those things you're doing. It should be this. And I think when you can understand that and embrace that and see how operating in that way replaces what we may have been doing 5 years earlier, then we really start to make some headway. And in that space, you can start to say, okay, look, I'm not doing something separate. I'm now doing marketing. I'm now doing customer engagement, and I'm using these tools to make that happen.
Yeah. No, well said. I completely agree. I think it's the mindset shift that needs to happen is customer engagement is all of these things, right? So it's just a new way of doing it. And we as leaders need to kind of create that shift. It's not, sales, marketing, all these things. It's customer engagement. And you've got data underpinning so many different then channels that you're kind of using depending on what works the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, well said. So your changes or the transitions you just described are fascinating to me. So maybe just talk us through, like, were there moments in that journey, whether it's through leadership or your faith, that shaped some of these decisions that you were making and when to move, when to stay, those kinds of things?
This is a great question. Uh, in a word, of course, or in two words, of course. But the reality of that and the practicality of that, I think, has not only ebbed and flowed over time. I think we've got a very different understanding as we get. Um, I was going to say older, but maybe what I mean is like deeper in our faith. I would say the decisions that I was faced with, and at all stages, at all steps, that was in partnership with my wife. I don't know that I faced them or went through those decisions in the same way that I would, or that I am today, because I'm certainly walking through similar seasons today as well. Um, I don't. I do recall, obviously, a handful of moments where we leaned on God. I mean, talking about what it's going to be like to move internationally, or going through the adoption process, or any of that stuff. Like, we were absolutely dialed in and near to Him. But there's a lot more of other decisions that were maybe felt in some ways lesser or quicker, where maybe we weren't as dialed in. And I don't necessarily mean times where it was like, give me strength for this discussion or that discussion. I've certainly done that too, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I mean strength more like resilience through seasons that feel difficult or challenging for whatever reason. Um, One example of this, while I was living abroad, there was a period of transition where I remember feeling like really out of my element. We had the opportunity to, very blessed to have the opportunity to go live in France, live in Paris. Um, and the amount of change you really go through in doing that. I mean, everything is different. My son had severe food allergies, so we were looking for what he could have and what he could eat. And all of those stereotypes about language are pervasive and true. And so, you just get worn down from the amount of change that's sort of going on. And there's a resiliency you really need to go through that. But my journey to work was about 80 minutes each way. And so I was on a number of different metros and all these things. And I had plenty of time. And I remember, I don't know if I did it right away, but at some point I remember this was back in the day of wired AirPods that weren't
Yeah.
wireless, but my wired AirPods, I was Christian worship music nonstop on some of those rides where it was just like, man, I just need to hear that you're there, that you're with me, that you're in front of me, that you've gone before me on these things, that, that I'm fine, that I'm going to be okay. And it was that like comfort and the nourishment of those moments where like, I know, I hope it doesn't sound cheesy in some ways because it was true. It was all I knew to do.
Hmm.
I knew I needed to lean on him because I also knew that even though I felt like I was struggling, I felt like I was worn down. I felt like there's just immense amount of change. I also knew that in that there was still preparation for whatever else was to come. And in a lot of ways that was comforting. I know it may sound
Yeah.
uh, opposed, but there's a lot of comfort in that. So I guess summarizing, like there's I think he's been present in all of our decisions. I think the intensity of our presence back to him has been the thing that's kind of gone back and forth. And in a season we're in right now, um, never before have we leaned into this phrase about, just having hands open. And that comes from a uh, sermon we heard recently about, God's not able to bless what you grasp or what you're clenching.
Mm.
And so really needing to have our hands just wide open, that he is absolutely working it out. He's there, he's ahead of us, and he's a lover. And so I would say that the intensity of of us leaning on him, helping shape the decisions we're making now is at a different place than where it was back in the day. But he was still present, and that was what we knew at the time. That was our walk at the time. So I hope that's encouraging too. That no matter where you are, no matter where you're at in your walk, that for others out there, just like we've done, it's the intensity of that can certainly ebb and flow.
Yeah. No, I think it's well said. As you were talking, I was reflecting on this idea. It's easy when things are going well. We always say thank you, right? But it's even
Mm,
in those hard times, like the way you said it, like we know it's preparation for something, and we need to be thankful even in those situations. And I think that takes a little bit of the burden off, right? Knowing that there's something else God has for us, and this is a moment of preparation and struggle that we're going through.
yeah.
I
I've
also,
got one
yeah,
more one more situation that, if you don't mind me
yeah,
sharing,
yeah. Please do.
and let me know if I'm running too
No, no,
long. But
no, no. Go ahead.
there's just one other real, like, I would describe as pivotal. When I was contemplating whether or not the company I was with was a company I wanted to stay with. Like it really started to lean first on my head, but pretty heavily on my heart that I didn't think this was really the place I needed to be for the next phase of my career. And
Mhm.
so for various reasons, things were becoming clear around me that the culture, the leadership, it wasn't right. And I started to just feel that. And I don't know that I necessarily attributed that to God at the time, but I think I look back and I attribute that to God. Like he
Mhm.
puts things on us that we may not realize or things that he's doing, but looking back, it was clear. Um, so I knew this where it wasn't where I needed to invest my own time, my own effort for the future. And the conviction of that just began to emerge. So the only thing was that the odd thing here is that that conviction was reaching a peak while my wife and I were on a house hunting trip to to relocate to where this company was located.
Mm.
And to do that, we had to sell our previous home. So when we went on this trip, I mean, we were all in. We didn't have a home to go back to, except to get our boxes out. We were really all in on going to this new place. But while we were there, we really felt the Lord telling us that we were going to do something different. And the key moment in this story was when my wife and I were talking through this about what we were feeling, and I was trying to share with her like why I was feeling this way and where my head was. Um, we, no home, no job, but 4 kids and a dog rely on us. I remember praying with her and crying, like we were just
Mhm.
literally sitting there crying. And I've never been that kind of person. It feels cringy to say out loud, but um, really cementing the step we were going to take together. The even funnier part of the story is we had taken an RV we owned at the time, so we were doing this in an RV lot in the middle of RV, praying and crying, and got through that. And after that moment, called my boss and told him what was going on, and offered a resignation, and a long resignation period. This wasn't acrimonious, it wasn't ugly, it wasn't anything like that, but it was just something that felt like was the right thing for us to do, even though there wasn't somewhere else to be. And so we took that RV and we headed back to the area where her in-laws, where my in-laws live, where her parents are from. And things worked out great. We didn't obviously know at the time, but I think it was like 60 days later, I was starting another job and was even promoted to, kind of that next hierarchy, that next level. So that worked out, and had a great run at that spot. So there's so much
Yeah.
faithfulness we don't know that's happening around us when we're going through that. But in that case, it, worked out really well. And I also look back and I think that 60-day window where there was nothing, man, it didn't feel like 60 days. That thing felt like
Right.
600 days.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was so short. And that was a place where we were just really, I mean, we had nothing else to do but lean on God in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like that story, Parker, because the vulnerability, right? I mean, like, it kind of transforms you emotionally. Like when you're going through something that's so uncertain, that you knew that you had to change, but then, like what you described as just kind of being broken down, right? And recognizing that you needed
Man,
to do
totally.
something. It's not normal, right? In our day to day, that's not something that happens. But I think being vulnerable to him allows us to kind of be open to what the next step is. So yeah,
Yeah,
great.
100%.
So let's talk about the tension that I know many people
Mm.
feel like when we're
hmm
working in corporate settings. So I'm going to actually ask you two questions, and I'll let you just talk through these. Um, so I think many leaders feel like a very practical tension, right? So it's not. Um, I don't think it's as simple as like, I don't think a company's unethical or anything like that. I don't think we'd be working there if it was things like that, right? But it's a very practical
Right.
tension of I know I can live my faith better at work, but I'm just not doing it, right? Have you ever felt that, and what does it look like for you? And then the second is, how do you navigate environments where maybe Christian values might be misunderstood or even challenged? Yeah, so I'll just those are kind of the
Yeah.
two things I think that people generally bring up around the tension.
I love actually how you phrase that with tension too. I've leaned into this idea that, and it comes out of some of the France story, but this idea that like, we grow the most when we're stretched the most.
Mm,
And I've just always loved that. So this idea of tension, um, is such a home plate or home base for that growth and where it can happen. So I just love that word. But yeah, you also said practical, and I think that's what I feel the most at work and in that setting. Like, how do I make space for time with God throughout the professional corporate day? Like, where does that fit? Is it supposed to fit? Um, and what does that look like? And I guess for everybody, the answer to that is very different. And I know in my last role at my last company, there was a prayer group and a series of invitations that came to attend that prayer group. And I got it early on because there was a guy on my team who was very open about his faith in ways that I had probably never seen anybody else be that open in the professional space, about their faith. And I don't know what it was about me that uh, allowed him to open up with that. Maybe he does that with everybody. It had nothing to do with me, but through him, I found out about this prayer group, and I remember accepting that, um, the series of invitations. I don't think I ever made it. I might have gone to one, but I'm not sure I ever actually made it. But it's set on my calendar. And the funny story, Josh, is I actually at some point realized I wasn't going to be making these invites, and so I tried to cancel the series. You know how you do, you
yeah,
cancel, delete, or decline the series. Funny thing is, it never went away. Like I couldn't get this invite off my calendar, and I don't know if that was I don't know if that was God like really talking to me, but I never ended up making it. But at the same time, um, I think what I ended up finding was that I never felt like that space was there to do that, and it's probably more of a me problem in the sense that I don't know that I'd ever just prioritize the space there to do that.
hmm
But I did find other things that I prioritized for me. So it wasn't really ever part of my walk to attend the prayer meeting. That doesn't mean I wasn't still operating with Christian like values or anything like that. I never did it in this case. And if that opportunity is there in the future, then I'll probably go through the same struggle and the same tension. But what I did end up doing was really trying to wrap my day in Christian values and in faith and all of that. And so, like many of hopefully the listeners on here too are doing the same things, right? Like, Bible in the morning. I'm not one of those who does my Bible before I look at my phone. I know a lot of people say that's such a great practice, but soon after I look at my phone, then it's Bible time, and that's usually in some shape or fashion with my wife. We've got various devotionals we're doing. We're working through the Bible recap right now, so proud to say we're only a couple days behind. So we're still doing that. And then, in the evening, like just trying to figure out ways that there's time and opportunity to get back in the Word. What I have found for me, and I think we'll talk about this later too, is I do try to make sure the environment around me is conducive to it. So I have moved a Bible onto my desk. I've got some things. At Christmas, I got this jar of these little verse cards. You pull one out and see what's on there. So I've tried to create an environment because I'm sure for most of us, we're at work in some way or capacity more than we're with our family sometimes. So in my world, I've been working remotely. So I try to create this space that sort of allows that. But, I don't know how I wonder if there's also a way where we can bring forward those open conversations of Christianity that are so easy with that gentleman I mentioned. Like he brought it up, not me.
Right.
And so our relationship often talked about faith. I've got other colleagues who I never talked about faith with. And I wonder if there is like a happy medium somewhere in there. Like how can I find out, who is also a Christian around me that we can, as they say, iron sharpens iron, that we can talk, with each other about this openly in the workplace every now and then. Obviously not as the primary conversation. And I wonder about that. I had at one point when I left a company and, you did the LinkedIn announcement about leaving and stuff like that, I did reference my faith in one of those announcements. And I was very pleasantly surprised that a few of the comments came back to me after that were people catching the faith comment I was making in that comment. And a couple of them said, like, I didn't know you were a man of faith. But knowing that now, I wish we had spent more time together. I wish that was something we could have talked about. And I was so encouraged by that. But it's probably also a pretty big regret too. And it's probably a pretty obvious message. Like there was so much more we could have done together had that been something that people knew.
Yeah.
And that's both them, me, and me, them. That never happened. I'll give you maybe just two more quick stories. There was on my team.
Just before that, Parker. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you're touching on something really important. I think that is something. I mean, I can speak for myself as well. Very similar to your experience in the sense that you don't know who is a believer or not, but you have to take the bold step of actually somehow bringing it up, right? So I think the very practical piece is just practicing how we do that. You know what I mean? Because I agree with you. I mean, I remember it was GSK. Like when I left, I knew a lot of people who were Christians and I'd spoken to them, but on that announcement, I did it very similar to what you're describing. And there were so many other people that kind of said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a Christian," and it kind of like, I mean, it was like,
did you get offended?
Yeah, no, I wasn't offended. I was actually like, I felt bad for I was like, man, I should have done more, right?
Right.
And I think that to me was a wake up moment, right? Because you think you're doing it, but I think there's so much more I could have been doing. And it doesn't even have to be, anything front and center. Like, I mean, you can just say it, right? When you introduce yourself to your team. So from then on, I always that was part of how I introduced myself to my team. So they would all know from the beginning. And it opened up so many good conversations.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah,
I think that's really
great
cool.
challenge, I think, to all of us, right? Just from the regret I faced anyway, was just be bold with it up front, and then things will open up, conversations will happen. So yeah, sorry
it's a good
to
reminder,
interrupt you. Yeah.
Those not so obvious, those what you thought were obvious cues you were giving turned out to be not obvious at all, right?
Correct.
Or
Yeah.
not forward enough. I had somebody on my team who was from the Netherlands and was a convert to Muslim. She became Muslim at some point in her life, and I had always wondered like what the deal was with that. And so at some point through a team dinner outing, she and I got into a religious just conversation, and I had an opportunity to hear her background and her story, and I was fascinated with it. And I will not even try to hit some of the points she made. I'm sure I will say wrong about the religion and the views, but what I found was so many similarities in the attributes and the values that she was looking for and why she leaned into that faith for her, and why she wasn't a Christian before. Her family wasn't a Christian, but she was surrounded by people of that faith at the time, and they met a number of needs she had. And it was she wasn't, I don't believe she was working at the time. This was before professional age, but it's similar to what we're trying to talk about here. Like, how do you never know who's in need of
Hmm.
kindness, gentleness, patience, and any of the gifts that God's put on us to bring to the world. And the opportunity, was met in that moment for her through a different religion, but there were so many similarities we discussed in that moment about that too. I just thought it was really interesting and eye opening, and it not only helped us get to know each other better, but you can also take opportunities to understand the faith journey of others that may not
Right.
be exactly the same, but the similarities were striking.
Yeah. Yeah.
If if I go back to your other question, if I can just real quick, the
Yeah.
second one was about being misunderstood. So how to navigating environments where values might be misunderstood. I think this ties on to what we were just saying, and um, I don't know that my values were ever misunderstood. Like, I don't think people misunderstand kindness or patience or humility or
Hmm.
gentleness or forget. Like, people just don't misunderstand that. I think, and I don't know that they challenge those, but I think probably more often, and just in response to the question, I think I have probably allowed myself, like my earthly self, to get the better of me to almost like not demonstrate those values. Um,
Mm.
I know the workplace. I'm as competitive as they come as others, and I want to do great work. And stakeholder engagement sometimes gets the best of us, right?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you agree with my view, or this is why I don't agree with yours, and whether that's pride or aggression or self righteousness or any of those virtues I'm still working on as a Christian. I I, I think that's when you're trying to demonstrate Christian values and you're trying to live that walk and you're trying to live that faith and you want people to see that. I think we give these confusing views to others when we then don't do that. And
Mm.
that's probably the thing that gets misunderstood. Like, wait, which one of these people are you? And so it's those types of things where I'm like, man, I didn't do that very well.
Right.
I need to do that one better. I've never gone to the lengths of having a faith based accountability partner for that kind of stuff, but I think maybe that's something to try in the future as you get open in that conversation with others and you're doing your walk at work with others. Like, maybe that is an opportunity. Where are you seeing me fall at times, and help me in that walk. But yeah, I think it's the things I give off that allow
Yeah.
people to misunderstand what I'm doing more than anything else.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I mean, just going back to what you were saying before about um, the meetings on your calendar, right? So you were invited to this meeting, you didn't go to it because it wasn't the best fit for you, right? From how you would practice that. And I think that is so true, right? I mean, I think we've got to all find what is the way we want to connect, and everybody's going to have something slightly different. Part of the reason we're doing what we're doing at Emmaus is kind of not saying here's the one way to do it, but giving
Hmm.
people options, right? So to your point about a faith-based partner, we have these things that we're calling collaboratories, where people get together in groups and kind of can talk through things, and there's also executive coaches, and then there's other things. But I think there's so much of that is, as churches, we've done a really good job of talking about, right and wrong and how to do it. But what I think we missed is like, how do we customize this for people to make it very practical for them to continue to develop and grow and take that faith into work, right? So I think you're highlighting actually a few things that, you know, may not have been a good fit for you, but then others that were really good fits, right? And you kind of found what worked for you, and that's what you kind
Yeah.
of leaned into. Yeah, that's
Well, and you
well,
remind me about the idea of spiritual gifts. I'm very new to learning about the depth of spiritual gifts and what that means and all that stuff. And I know that like prayer
mm,
is some people's spiritual gift, and I probably what stopped me from attending that meeting was just the unknown of like, well, what happens at this meeting? Are we on Zoom and everybody's head is bowed and we each pray out loud, or like I don't know.
right.
You make up, you fill that gap when you don't know. I probably should have gone just to see what it was, but you're right. For me, I had a hard time fitting in my day. That's a priority thing I should question, but it didn't fit for me. And so I think you're right. I think leaning at finding out what not only what does work for you, but where are your gifts that you can then offer back, or
Yeah,
where can you lean into the gifts of others that you may not have that
yeah,
can help embolden and broaden your faith is something we should look out for.
yeah. So, I think we've begun to touch on this, but I think what talking around, and maybe we'll just go straight down the middle here, is, it's not so much speaking about our faith, but living our faith, right? So what are the examples, or how do we live it so that people don't question, like, I like the way you said it. Now, which one of these are you, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, maybe the couple thoughts or questions I have, and you can kind of take us down whichever path you want, is like, what have you learned about the power of living out your faith? How do you show it, rather than trying to explain it, right? And then, are there habits, or disciplines that you kind of have implemented through your work
Mhm.
week, for people to, that have helped you? I guess that may be helpful for people who are listening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing we just talked about too leans into this also around the things that we do that can be confusing to others who observe us. And it's almost like the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the time, I'm probably giving off the values I hope I'm giving off
Hmm.
in living out my faith. 20% of the time I stumble. Hopefully it's less than that and it's 90-10 or something. But probably the inverse is true for others who observe us. They see the 20% as that you're giving off as the more dominant version
Right.
of you. They don't see the 80. And so I think we probably give ourselves almost too much grace sometimes to say like, well, I only slipped up a little today.
Mm.
Um, but for someone else who interacted with you, that might be the only thing they saw you today. Or maybe that's what you've done in the last 3 meetings you've been in with them
Hmm.
over the course of a couple of weeks, right? And like all of a sudden, like you are nowhere near who you think you are.
Yeah, especially when
Um,
that project's not going well or is in behind, right?
exactly.
So like
Yeah.
then there's a different kind of, thing that comes out. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've tried to let that almost like rubber band snap
Mm.
be there for me on those types of things, like that um that moment where I didn't show up like I wanted to show up was probably has more of an impact than showing up how I want to 9 times out of 10. I still have to do the 9 times out of 10, but I got to work on smoothing out the 1 time out of 10 or 2
Mhm.
times out of 10. So what I've focused on a lot in my more recent prayer time has been about asking the Lord to help show my faith to others. Like how can I show what it's like to be a follower and a servant of God? Like put those opportunities in my path. I don't know that that's ever been an intentional prayer I've had before. This sort of season or this time where I'm asking for those types of things, and I don't know necessarily what that's going to look like each and every day, and it doesn't necessarily always look like something specific, right? But
Mhm.
it's I think it's take starting your day with that posture of I know I need to be um, on far more times than I'm not, and I need him to help not only put people in my path where I can have the opportunity to show or demonstrate that, or even maybe verbally or action oriented help, but I need to make sure that I'm always 10 times out of 10, living how I want to. The other word that comes to mind when we talk about this topic is servanthood. Like I've always gravitated towards leadership. I have always, I mean, from little league baseball, being a catcher on the field. Like I have
Mhm.
always wanted to be a leader and gravitated towards that. But what I've always gravitated towards in leadership has been servanthood, like servant leadership. And I mentioned I lived in France when I was talking about career goals with my boss in a conversation. I remember trying to describe for her. I told her I wanted to be a servant leader. That's really the image I wanted to show to others and all that. She tried to explain to me that like that just doesn't translate for France and the culture and the language. And she said that's a really American thing to say.
Yeah.
Um, and so as I went on to
Very
work in,
US MBA
yeah,
Parker, right?
yeah, exactly. Or even church Parker, like
Yeah.
Bible Belt.
Yeah,
I grew up in
yeah,
Arkansas, I went to church camp Parker.
yeah.
And so that was really helpful because I think it also opened me up to this idea that like not everybody gets what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
Um, and one, that's okay. But two, you may have to find different ways to help really explicitly call that out or express that. And so I've probably said servant leadership far less than I said it in my first half of my career,
Mhm.
but I think I've shown it a lot more in my latter half than I did my first half too. And that's because I think I tried to understand where others were and where they're coming from, and less about what I was trying to do and you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the perspective of helping others see who you are versus trying to show others who you are is what helped shape that.
Yeah.
But that was really fundamental for my walk. The only other thing I've done, and this has been far more recent, you mentioned, habits and things like that. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I've moved a Bible to my space and it's not just a Bible on the desk. Like there are times when I'm going through it and looking for things that come up. Um, my wife, a handful of years ago, when my kids were smaller, we started this tradition at New Year's of doing vision boards. And so I
Hmm.
don't know if any of the listeners do vision boards, but we literally do them January 1st. There's about a 2 to 3 hour block of time that we sit down. We've got all the markers and we do that kind of stuff. And a few years back, she asked us as part of vision boards to do a word of the year. These vision boards have taken many iterations. She's, of course, Pinterest has given her different ideas on what they should hold and that kind of stuff. And one of the years it was, what's your word of the year?
Uh-huh.
And in that year, my word happened to be composure. It was something I felt like I was struggling with professionally. I needed to maintain composure in meetings. I needed to just watch all these things. But that has evolved over time to become more of like a faith-based word of the year. And more importantly, the word that we are leaning into has gone on. I've gone on to tape it onto my screen. Like I mentioned, I work mostly remote, and so I'm staring at my
Hmm.
screen more than anything else. And so I've put that word on my screen and use that as one of my daily visual reminders. Now it's there and I can easily overlook it, but it is something that I lean into each and every day. The other thing I use is a couple of app reminders, like most of us. But the one I have found the most helpful, Josh, I didn't realize this was there until maybe a couple months ago. If listeners have an iPhone, one of the home screens you can use is a photo shuffle, and so
Hmm.
you can set a number of photos that it just runs through, and you can set the time how often it changes. And what I've done, that I just love, so I'm happy to share this one, is curated a set of those like really nice background imagery things that has a verse
Yeah.
on it or some kind of quote.
Yeah.
I've just curated like a set of those over the last couple of months. I think I'm up to about 19 of them now.
Hmm.
And it just runs through those. I have it set to where it changes on the hour. Your phone can do other things if you want it to. But for me, that works great because, I'm ashamed to admit, but I do check my phone while a meeting's going every now and then. But when I do check my phone, like that's what I see.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that's there. And because it's changing every hour, I am getting this just reminder of not only a message, but because I've selected these things, they each mean something to me that has been really relevant in the last, even 60 days of what's been going on. So that's been a really, I think, just simple and powerful one for me. I know a lot of people like to have, their families on phone, that kind of stuff, but this is what I've chosen.
Yeah.
It really works for me.
I like that. Very practical. I mean, and it's so simple. I like your idea about word of the year. I think that's something that we've all probably thought about, but I don't know if I do it probably at the beginning of the year, but I like your idea of just writing it down and then putting it, on somewhere where I can see it all the time, the
Yeah.
computer screen or wherever. I think that's a really good idea. The other thing I just want to underscore that you said is the servant leadership part, right? I always, I mean, that's the example, but um, sometimes things get oversaturated in culture, right? So they're good Christian principles like servant leadership. But once the book comes out and everybody's reading it, now servant leadership, I know this is not the example you were giving, but as you were talking, I was just
Yeah.
reflecting on this. Servant leadership becomes like everybody's read the book and now it just becomes some secular idea or concept. And then it becomes very rote. It's not something new anymore once everybody's read it. And so I always think it's important for us to keep a pulse on what's going on in corporate world, like in the environments we're working on. And once we start to recognize that there's some of these ideas that are pretty well ingrained and well understood, how do you still make them impactful, or how do you move to the next
Right.
idea, right?
Right.
And I think servant leadership for me, I remember going to Seattle when I was working at that organization. They all came from West Coast companies, and servant leadership had kind of made its run, the book, right? And so when you talked about that, it was very well understood and ingrained in people, and it wasn't aha moments anymore for people, right? I mean, that's kind of what they aspired to do, which was really good in one way, right? Because people all understood it. But then it also opened my eyes up to the opportunities that still existed. What else could I
hmm
do and demonstrate to kind of bring in more Christian ideas, values, those kinds of things? Because servant leadership is very much a Christian idea, just secularized. And I think there's
Right.
other ideas like that too. So
Right.
anyhow, for me, it was
That's a great build.
just an aha moment around. Sometimes you got to understand where the world is, right? Sometimes it's not always against Christian principles, right? It's actually embracing them, just secularized.
And I feel like the sister thought to that, or the sister book to that book is the Five Love Languages.
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
Chapman book. It's almost
Mhm.
like what the idea of servant leadership. It doesn't have to just be like acts of service, right? It can be the words you say. It can be spending time with your colleagues. It can be all those things underneath the Five Love Languages. I also
Mhm.
had somebody recently tell us, if your love language is not one of the five, like create your own sixth or seventh
Mm.
or eighth, right? So like I think that idea of servant leadership just it can also be an umbrella for all those things.
Yeah.
And for me, it's acts. I mean, I love to receive words, but it's doing acts. And so that was always something that I was, leaning on is how do I serve you? And for me, it felt like a physical service more than anything else. But no, it's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So I know we're coming up close to time here. So there's one thing though I do want to kind of get your thoughts on. So as obviously you've a lot of great feedback and thoughts, Parker, in this conversation. But is there anything that you, as you're preparing for this, kind of was like, okay, I need to do this differently going forward? So we'd love to kind of hear that. And then I'd also like to maybe close by actually just getting your um, kind of what you're working on now. We talked about fourth
Yeah.
at the beginning of
Yeah.
this, so we can kind of I'd love to kind of get your perspective on that and kind of how people can participate in that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Great. Yeah. So what I definitely what I would do differently, I didn't say it a minute ago, but my word of the year is discipleship for this year.
Hmm.
Um, because it's something I feel like I've really struggled with. And where that comes from is your own or my own willingness or lack of to get into like a religious conversation with a colleague. It almost feels like a theme we've had throughout this call. Referring back to the gentleman who was very open with his and that unlocked me. And then how you and I talked about we weren't open with others, but we're able to unlock that when it was too late in some ways.
Hmm.
So I have, there was somebody on my team recently that reported to me where, I've always been more shy than not to get into this type of conversation. Like even with those where I feel like we're almost peers, despite the reporting relationship, it was somebody who I consider more of like a sparring partner.
Hmm.
Um, but it's always uncomfortable to ask others about their faith journey or like what prevents them from taking that step or even just, why don't you attend church or, that kind of stuff. So I had this person on my team who was probably as I look back, like the ideal person to get into this conversation with. She was very inviting with, all of the things going on in our lives. She talked about her family. We talked about my family, that kind of stuff. So there wasn't, I do feel like the respect, the opening probably was there for something like this, but I just couldn't ever do it. I couldn't ever get into the depth that I really wanted to on that topic. I often like nibbled around the edges as, I'd
Hmm.
throw in like a thank God here and there, or we're praying for you, or
Hmm.
mention things that my family were doing, about church, whether it was like a Christian concert here or there, or the church we were attending, that kind of stuff. But I just never got into that next level about where I could almost try to like, I don't know, in some ways influence her to seek the kingdom of God? Like, is there a small step you could take? Is there, and I think something that's definitely something moving forward. I want to be able to step out in faith in, even as uncomfortable as I feel like that might be. I never want to do that. I think what's held me back is I never want to do it in a way that's offensive or too forward or too brazen, because I think that's also what, in a lot of ways, whether it's through the 80s or 90s, almost gave like, religion a bad name. You go to church and you get somebody knocking at your door on Tuesday or whatever it
Hmm.
is. And I don't want to do that. So I don't know that I've found the right way to get into the conversation that eases into that, but I certainly see that both as a regret from that experience, but also, an opportunity going forward. And that's why that discipleship word is, my word for this year is how do I share that? Where are my opportunities? And so that goes along with the prayer I'm saying, like, Lord, give me those opportunities, put people in my past and let me show them what it looks like for me. So that's what was really top of mind as I was kind of preparing for this. And I think will probably be a regret for quite a while. But that's what I
Yeah,
want to do differently.
yeah, that's good. And then fourth, maybe quickly talk about fourth, what the word actually means, and then what you're working on.
Yeah, yeah. No, look, I appreciate the opportunity. So, fourth is something that was born out of an idea where I think many of us are entrepreneurial in some way, but may or may not have the opportunity to go be a full on entrepreneur. So at one point in time, like all of us, I sat down with ChatGPT and I was like, hey, what if I was going to open an LLC for the various wonderful ideas I'm having about doing all these things? Like, what should I call that LLC? And so I went back and forth and I was like, I want this to be biblical. I want to do all this stuff. And what emerged, was asking me about what were influences of mine. And I talked about the story in Daniel 3 with King Nebuchadnezzar and, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. I talked about that story about, the fourth man in the fire. And so that's really where the idea was born. It was this idea about almost like an LLC umbrella of some kind, but it was more because that story really resonates with me.
Mhm.
I love this idea of, in that, if you read the Bible story, it talks about the king and others looking at the fire and seeing that fourth man, but knowing they put three in there, right? Like they can
Mhm.
see the man and none of them got burned and all of this stuff. And so this idea for me of having that presence in my own life through all of the, let's call them fires that I feel like I've walked through, um, where you do feel down and challenged and under pressure and all those things, but you've always, or I feel like I have always had the presence of God with me in each of those moments where you just didn't know what was going to happen, but He had you. I, I love that. I absolutely love that story. And so, the LLC never happened. I haven't done all those other great ideas. But what I leaned into recently was writing. I used to love to write and I love to speak. I go, I've done various speaking engagements throughout my pharma career and I enjoy those opportunities. And I've had some really positive feedbacks. People have been very kind about the times that I've spoken. And so I found that combining those two things gave me the opportunity to put some of that love for speaking and love for writing together. And so I had all these stories that I had amassed or had built up over time that I thought I could share, with the world in some way. And so I've been doing that. So I started a Substack. I just learned really what Substack was a little bit earlier this year and started a Substack. And I've called it Fourth. And so Fourth has become for me a platform, I guess, first an outlet for sharing these stories that, if they reach nobody, that's great. It's helping me find a voice and get those out there. If they reach somebody and help them, that's great too. But what they do is it gives me an opportunity to not only share some of the business learnings and the takeaways that I'm sure we've all probably walked through similarly in one way or another, but it also provides this platform for people to be like, well, hey, what's Fourth? Because what I didn't want to do was really two things. I didn't want to be LinkedIn post guy, LinkedIn blog guy. I didn't want to do that.
Mhm.
But I also didn't want to be like really forward, like we've talked about. I didn't want to be really forward in the faith part of this because I know that can be such a turnoff for some people.
Mhm.
But I did want this to be a platform that could provide a lead into that discussion. So by leaving the name out there, it's not Fourth Man. It's not like it's just Fourth. Because I want that to be just left out there and invite the conversation like, what's Fourth? And we can get into that conversation.
Right.
So it's become a platform for that where, you can offer that. It's still early. I've done, I think I've done 4 essays out there. I'm also trying to put podcasts behind them to help people read through them. And behind the reading of the essay, I then add some additional behind the scenes commentary to those stories. I'm working on one right now called Feedback. The idea that feedback maybe isn't the gift we think it is. So we'll talk about that, and we'll see what comes from it. But I appreciate you asking about it. People can go on Substack. It's called Fourth Letters .substack.com, and would love to see any comments or hear others examples of walking through the same types of fires.
Very good, Parker. Love it. Love the name. I think I like the approach as well about creating curiosity that opens up the conversation. I think that's phenomenal. And a lot of really good takeaways here. I think very practical examples of things that we can do. For me personally, I know the theme that I think is coming through your words, but also as I've been reflecting, is just boldness of taking the first step, even when things may seem uncomfortable. And then the second is, focus on picking something that we want to work on. Yours is discipleship for this year. Previously, there was other things you were working on. I think that's something that I have taken on as something I'm going to put front and center on my computer screen and kind of focus on that for the year. So very good, pragmatic, practical advice, Parker. Thank you so much for jumping on and joining us. And thank you all for joining the Adameus podcast. We'll get Parker's information out in the description. And we look forward to talking to you guys next time. Have a good rest of your day and week.